click here to continue. I want a well-functioning website. Give me the best experience. I've read the terms and give my consent. OK, agree, yes, and got it. The click on agree comes in many variations, and the one is even more poetic than the other. But what do we actually give agree to when we so thoughtlessly click on one of these buttons? Well, I think it's no shame to admit that we don't read every policy before you enter a website or open an application. But you will be nuts too, because an average internet user clicks on about 1,700 of these buttons every year. But what do we actually agree to? Well, I was very interested in that. And in my search to what companies know about me and what we actually have to agree to and why do we so obediently click on agree, I found a trusted third-party hosting network. And that means that with one click, you might accept more than one policy at the same time, sometimes even hundreds of policies. Well, looking in my active cookies, I found a website that I couldn't recall to have visited recently. It was the dailymail.co.uk. It's a British news platform, or maybe more a gossip magazine. But I didn't know why it was in there, why it was active on my laptop. So I started researching into the mechanics of giving OK here. And I have to say I did something quite radical, because you expect to click here on got it, right? Because that gives you access to the websites. Well, I actually clicked on cookie settings, and there I saw it. 835 companies that all agree with that same click, with that one click on got it. So to make that number, 835 companies, a bit more imaginable, I collected them manually and published them into this book. It's quite a big book. It's about 10 centimeters thick. It's A4 size, and it has 5 columns of 5 points monospace font in it. So for the non-typographers amongst us, that are a lot of tiny letters on a lot of pages. And I am Julia Janssen. Welcome here. Thanks, Chris, for introducing me already. So I'm an artist, I'm a designer, and I do research on the impact of digitalization, and I use art to explore new directions for the internet. Because unfortunately, we have some difficulties, we're facing some challenges. So why is this okay? Why is it okay to give away all your digital civic rights with one click on accept? What about transparency? What about responsibility? And what about accountability? What about giving informed consent? Let me talk a bit more about that term, giving informed consent. I think it's a very fascinating concept. Because it is one of the foundations of our digital civic rights. It's what makes the GDPR so progressive, to have choice, to have transparency. Well, let's see how that translates. So, giving informed consent is a term in which you actually it's a progressive right because you are aware of all the consequences with a click on consent. But I think it's very obvious here in this book, in this publication, that it's not possible to know where you give a consent for, because you don't know where your data is. I mean, in the GDPR, there are lots of progressive rights. They're very well thought and very well written on paper, but how to execute those rights, how to know where your data is and how to apply to informed consent, how to apply to be forgotten, for example, when you have no clue where your data is. So I think that's a question that we need to ask and see how we address that. So I was exhibiting this book for a while, and in December 2019, I got to present it to Aleid Wolfsen here. He's the chairman of the Dutch Data Protection Authority. And I had quite a critical question for him, and I was very nervous to ask him, as you probably see on my face on this picture. Article 6 of the GDPR states lawfulness and processing. So one must have given his or her informed consent about the processing of his or her data for one or more specific reasons. So I asked Mr. Wolfsen, what does informed consent really mean when one click equals 835 times agree? So I actually honestly became quite obsessed with that term, giving informed consent, because it's quite a philosophical concept as well. But it's interesting that we know it here from the tech domain, from privacy policy regulations and from the GDPR. But it's actually a term that originates from the medical domain. It means giving informed consent is a procedure in which someone is informed about the possible advantages and disadvantages of a medical treatment before that person decides whether or not to undergo that treatment. A valid procedure will consist of 3 steps. The first one is information. So a party must provide all information required so that a person can make a decision independently in a way that this information can be understood. The second one is judgment. So that person must be able to make a reasonable judgment based on the information that is given. And the third one is voluntariness. So there must be the person must be not being pressured. There must be no manipulation, no coercion, no temptation. The person must make his decision complete volunteer. So let's again see how that translates in the digital domain. Well, like this. So I think despite the fact of all the information that is written in this book and whether or not you're able of actually knowing what you give your consent for, let's focus on that last part, the voluntariness, because is it really a choice that we make here very consciously, or is it really a choice or a fair choice? I see that in a couple of levels. So the first one, and actually it's actually forbidden within the GDPR, but it happens all the time. A website or most apps are not or maybe partly accessible without that click on consent. So of course, we can argue it's a choice whether or not you use an app or platform or you click agree or not. And I think it is a choice maybe reading the Daily Mail or The Guardian, but honestly, I don't have much reason to believe that The Guardian wouldn't be involved in a trusted third-party hosting network like this. But anyway, I think, in many ways, it's not really a question of whether or not you want to use the internet or a website or an app. So, yeah, is it really a choice here? The second one, and I find it very fascinating from a designer perspective, is how this choice actually is offered to us, how it's presented, because it's quite obvious what they want me to click on, right? I mean, despite that the green button is not only more present and more visible, besides the one next to it with settings, which is almost blending into the page and not very visible, that green also gives a signal to your brain. It says, we associate green with good, we associate green with go. So yeah, you probably click on that. I mean, imagine what will happen if the accept button will be red. I mean, that will be a completely different experience. So another thing, recently, a lot of websites started to give us multiple options. So they give us the option to accept functional third parties and not the trusted third parties, or the cookie settings, or the functional parties. Well, does it really make that more clear? I think that's a really important question to ask, because it only makes us click more, but makes it also more. Does it also make it more clear what people want, or what they accept or what they not? And it's more clicking, and we probably do this a lot of times every day. So yeah. Again, most people just click on the easy one and just click agree and continue. And yes, there are, of course, also now a lot of new alternatives. They're very good alternatives to start using, for example, Signal instead of WhatsApp, or DuckDuckGo instead of Google. But why isn't everybody doing that? Well, I think a couple of things are happening here. For most people, it's not really visible because, most people, Google is in your habits, Facebook is in your habits, it's what your friends are using. And besides that, it's also tech corporations are top leaders because of the reason of having a lot of data. So, I mean, Google is Google. It's a very good search engine and a very good navigation system and many more things because it has all this data. And I think from an innovation perspective, that's also a very important thing to think about. Like, how do we centralize this data, and how do we also keep these companies at a high advantage because of the access to a lot of data, because we're giving it to them because of systems like this. So how about these infrastructures? And I mean, there are a lot of things, you know, written in consent forms, and we can argue about all these different kind of strategies, but I think mainly all these strategies, and also reading the privacy policy, it's very clear that it's not to protect my rights, but it's to protect the legal part of these big tech corporations and for their market power. So yeah, there are many words written down in these privacy policies, but what do we actually agree to? Well, I think we also have to think about long-term consequences to market power and what's happening with the infrastructures of data and data sharing. So the question, what we actually do agree to, I thought it was very interesting. And during exhibitions with the book, I thought it was quite fascinating that most people didn't approach it as a book. Most people approached it like an object, you know? During exhibitions, people were saying like, whoa, it's so big, or maybe, whoa, those letters are very tiny, or sometimes saying like, whoa, is it heavy? But it was nice that it was never really a book. It became really like a sculpture for people. And I started thinking, how do I make it more clear that it is not a sculpture? It's a collection of contracts that we all agree to all the time. How do I make that content more clear? Because it's not about that it's 10 centimeters thick and it has tiny letters. What is stated in there? Well, the obvious way, of course, was actually to start reading it. So I needed a place and time to read it, because I wanted to know what we actually do give agree for. So I called Dutch Design Week 1.5 years ago in 2019. I called Dutch Design Week and I said, hey, are you up for something crazy and quite experimental? Because I want to have a pop-up radio studio somewhere outside on a square, and I want to do a privacy policy reading out loud marathon. And we actually did that. So I placed a container here to build a pop-up radio studio, and I knew it was going to take hundreds of hours. I wasn't sure yet how long it will take, but I mean some minor calculations, and I knew it was going to be hundreds of hours. So it will be quite exhausting. So as I knew, I'm not going to do that myself. Definitely not. I mean, I'm an artist. I do crazy stuff, time-consuming stuff, but I'm not going to read the whole book myself. And I also want to engage people. What actually are they agreeing to? So I wanted to invite people to do that, to read them with me. So 0.0146 seconds is a collective read out loud collective read out loud performance in which everybody can participate. Because if one click equals 835 privacy policies, how many hours of reading will it equals the 0.0146 seconds in which you click? So here I started. The first page myself, and afterwards people recite and took all 15 minutes and gave me voluntarily 15 minutes of their life to read the privacy policies with me. And it was quite an extraordinary experience. People find it also very extraordinary to participate. So it was also very amazing for me as well. It was quite a risk also, I have to say, because, you know, I'm quite a perfectionist, I have to admit. So giving up the success of my work in the hands of, you know, people who willingly want to read privacy policies with me was terrifying, I have to say. But I couldn't expect it to be, this amazing, and people so enthusiastically participated in this project. So yeah, it was amazing, and it really was kind of a marathon for me. I was there, you know. 9 days straight, from 11 in the morning till 7 in the evening. So hundreds of people already participated during that week, and it was, a very extraordinary experience. I have to say, there was this moment that there was a kid who was 11 years old, and he heard me talking about the project on the radio, and he actually said to his dad, like, hey, can we drive to Eindhoven? Can we go to Julia's? And I want to read privacy policies, and it was such an honor to meet this kid, and he did so well. I mean, it's legal text, it's quite tough to read. So yeah, it was also a very proud moment for me to engage this person, this kid actually, in my work, and also and thinking like him, like, hey, well, that's the future, you know, if you already are so conscious about this. So yeah, during that week, about 150 people participated. It was a lot of fun, a lot of interesting talks with people who participated in the project. But of course, we were not nearly towards the end. So I wanted to travel around, so I was planning on doing this tour. To go to events, to festivals, to all kinds of places to invite people to continue this reading process, which was, an artist's dream, right, to go on a tour. But then the whole COVID situation unfortunately began. So after this event at Waag in the OBA here in Amsterdam, the public library here in Amsterdam, we had to unfortunately postpone the rest of the tour. So we're still not sure how many hours it will take to read the whole book, but we're working very hard on it. But this moment here in the OBA was with Katelijne Buitenweg. She was one of the participants at this event. And a couple of weeks after this event, she actually spoke about the book and the project in Parliament during a debate on the future of information infrastructures here. And she asked Parliament, what does informed consent really mean when one click equals 835 times agree? Well, again, very extraordinary moment to me to see my work and my question going here to Parliament. And that also actually motivated me to start something else that I will talk about a bit more in a bit. To continue this question and also continue this quest to how to change the system and try to reach to establish this term informed consent. So also during the pandemic, we found some ways to continue this process. For example, here at Into the Great Wide Open, we did an alternative event setting here in Amsterdam as well, at the Tolhuistuin. Completely COVID-proof, of course, which was also very nice. And we recently also did 2 virtual events. The first one with Mozilla Firefox and one with Next Speaker, which was a completely new, different situation. I had to admit that I actually hosted this from my home for a couple of weeks. So I built this stage in my living room, and it was also, I mean, it was completely different than talking with people in person about it. But it was also a whole new opportunity to have people reading from all over the world. So people in Azerbaijan or in Argentina or in New York and Tokyo, they were all zooming into my living room and read a page, which was also a whole new dimension, and to continue to enthuse people about this. So that will lead again to an auditory work of art, probably about 300 hours or so of audio. A couple of thousand people participating in all different kinds of setting, and it's unsure how it will continue because of the situation. But well, we're doing our best to find ways to finish the book, because obviously we still have a lot to go. And I think the extraordinary thing about this project is that it really starts people to think about how to create movement on this, and to start asking questions, not in a way that it's about privacy or haven't anything to hide, but it's really about, control and transparency and the ability of knowing what a person or a party knows about you, and having the right to not constantly be exploited by your attention and make you buy things that you don't want, or maybe worse, make you buy things that you can't afford, because that's constantly still a thing. So I think that's something that we really have to fight for, and don't just accept it. Read with us is the main statement of this work and the things that I'm working on. So let's collaborate. I mean, not only to read this whole book together, but there are many challenges that we have to conquer. And during the pandemic, I also found a new way to work on that. Actually, I was thinking I had already this recording set and this audio studio. I was thinking, how can I still raise my voice also in a time that we can't exhibit or can't gather? So again, I needed a place to do that. Well, I found it again in my living room. So I started a podcast to talk about this topic, to talk about things like informed consent with people like, for example, Katelijne Buitenweg, with Ruben Verborg and many other people that I was honored to meet over the years or wanted to meet, and I found a way to do that. So that is very nice. I started the first series in Dutch, which was called Achter de Klik, and after a couple of episodes, I started an English show, actually, a Hyperclick podcast. To go also to talk with international guests. So yeah, it's such an extraordinary way of meeting people and engaging people again in this team, and also finding ways to collaborate, because I'm talking with politicians and lawyers and data scientists and people from all kinds of fields to engage and to find ways to work on different sectors. So, for example, with Paul Tang, he's a politician, European politician, and we talked about the Digital Services Act, or about the datafication of the healthcare sector. And actually today I published a brand new episode with Cathy O'Neill, the writer of Weapons of Mass Destruction, about discrimination in algorithms, which is also a very important theme. So yeah, that's kind of my way to find people, to find ways to collaborate with people, to engage and to talk about how to conquer this all-important theme. So saying, let's collaborate, I mean, there are such big challenges. I mean, there are things to do with data and algorithms. We have to think about new infrastructures and, you know, improving healthcare and education. And there are so many extraordinary things to do with data and algorithms. So yeah, let's find ways to work on that. I think as an industry, I think it's our responsibility to talk about these things and to find each other, because, you know, it is very interdisciplinary. It's a cross-sectorial issue. So yeah, we need each other. And I think it's, for example, important to help the users, because I found that term users very interesting. I was once looking for synonyms of the word user, and they were actually all related to drugs or to addiction. And I thought, whoa, that's actually quite striking, you know, that we see people as opportunities to make them addicted to our services or to our platforms. So yeah, is that a way in how we want to approach people? Maybe we need to help people to, you know, to protect them from the dealer's hunger for money and power, because that's of course what's happening. It's a power and a money strike in many ways. So let's define some public values on the internet. I mean, we did that in our physical world as well. We have defined the common good and public infrastructures and all those things. And yeah, like I said, there are so many great opportunities with data and algorithms. So let's maybe focus on that. I think the quite neoliberal capitalistic spirit of the 90s, you know, thought that the free market will regulate itself, and that governmental interference will only be in the way of innovation, but that again led to this hunger for money and power. So yeah, let's rethink public values also in the digital domain. Let's establish informed consent. I mean, informed consent really works very well in this medical domain, because it actually has the trust of the institution behind it. We have the trust in the medical sector, in the healthcare professional, in the hospital behind it. So that trust is very important there to give informed consent. So I think that's maybe also what we need to consider, thinking about informed consent in the digital domain, because we want that. Let's create choice. Let's create real choice. Let's create a way in which you actually are able to know what people know about you, what companies know about you, and for what reason, and give people a choice in that. And let's reset our definition of success, because there are still too many victims of algorithmic harm. I mean, poor people with not a very good education, people with, I don't know, obese, or people with a different ethnicity, people with a double nationality. They are victims of algorithmic harm, and they are very easily overlooked because of this hunger for innovation and money and power. So I think it's very important to reset our definition of success, because that success is mainly, again, pointed towards money and power. So Let's use our bright minds for something else than making people click on advertisements. I mean, I think Jeffrey Hammerberger, the former data scientist at Facebook, said it a couple of years ago. Like, why do we use the brightest minds of our generation to make people click on ads? Because there are, you know, very extraordinary things to do with data and with algorithms. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on everything that we conquered today, and find ways to, you know, maybe it's time to say that I'm actually quite a tech optimist, not so much a pessimist. I mean, I love technology, I love social media, I love a lot of things that the internet have to offer, but, you know, it can be something else than make people click on advertisements. So yeah, let's take responsibility together as an industry. Let's take our responsibility, because we all want to become digital citizens, and we all want an equal and a fair choice in a digital society. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Julia, for this very enlightening talk. And that's what artists do, right? I mean, you pick something out of our daily lives. You just click on a button on a news website, agreeing on something. You think, well, it's probably okay. And all the data you got out of it, and you printed it in a book. This is reality. I mean, this is not fiction. This is not something an artist makes up. This is what we as an industry, the internet industry, do to our users all day. And this is just one click. I mean, imagine a day or a life. You would have a whole library of, well, legal documents you agree to, right?
Yeah.
So, but it started with a British news website.
Yes.
Did you ask their informed consent to proceed with your project? Because they don't show really nice to them.
Well, funny enough, I reached out to them already quite a couple of times, but they never responded to me. They probably, when I first did that was, I think, 3 years ago, so 2.5 years ago, they probably thought like, well, yeah, that Dutch girl, we didn't care, so yeah. We couldn't care less. So they never responded actually. So yeah, I haven't tried it again, to be honest. I've reached out in the beginning, like, I think 6 times or so. I emailed them, I called them, saying like, hey, I'm doing a lot of projects about you, and yes. I'm giving a lot of talks.
Click here if you agree.
I also never imagined myself naming the Daily Mail as much as I did in my whole life so far. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary thing to call.
Well, if the Daily Mail is watching now, you agreed, consented with her presentation. If you have any questions or comments, please put them on the chat so I can see them here. But it's also very serious because there's no freedom of choice. People agree with something they don't see. So this and some of your other projects have also been supported by SIDN, which is the Dutch registrar for .nl. So yes, we as an industry, we also take this quite serious. Yeah. Is it the tech industry to blame, or is it also the lawyers? Because they make up so much complicated laws we need to adhere to, and we just put them in the agree and we say yes.
I don't think there's any particular party to blame in here. I think it's the system as a whole. I think it's also what I said, like, in the end of my presentation, it kind of, I mean, the internet became publicly available in the 90s, and there was this kind of neoliberal capitalistic spirit where we thought like, yeah, well, the free market will regulate itself. I mean, a lot of things were privatized in that time. So I think also with the internet, in that time, it was quite... it was quite obvious that it was going in that direction. I think now, I mean, and then people started to speak up, saying like, hey, there's a lot of potential for surveillance problems and, you know, privacy problems. But yeah, I think it was just a bit too late that we actually started to listen to that voices.
Yes, but to what kinds of things do people agree then? Which really surprised you that you thought, well, why are they collecting this kind of data, or why are they doing that?
It's funny because
didn't read all of it, of course, but some snippets you found really remarkable.
Oh, I read a lot actually. Honestly, I mean, there are just there's not a particular thing that I was very surprised about. I mean, they say things like, yeah, we keep it for that long or for that long or for that reason. But I think that what is very important that nobody takes responsibility in those policies. They're all saying, we're not doing this, and then give a whole bunch of exceptions. So, you know, they actually are doing it, but just trying to avoid really saying it, distracting people also from saying that, but also saying like, we don't do that, but we share with that and that party, and we don't take responsibility for their doings. So I think it's constantly, pushing around where actually people saying what they actually are doing. And I think it's interesting that all these policies also have different types of languages,
So it's not informed consent, but more confusing
It's
consent.
very confusing, yes.
Loopholes in the text.
Yeah, and also, the new regulation states that it has to be, written unparadoxal, and that people must be able to understand it. But
It's not comprehensible.
Try to really understand it.
But we would love to help you out. How many more pages need to be read?
About 700.
700.
Yeah.
So if you don't have anything to do at home, please help Julia with reading out loud some of the, actually policies we might be using ourselves too. And I assume these companies don't read them themselves too. It's just the legal department, just copies, paste, puts everything together. But you finished with the sprinkle of hope, saying, well, we are now using the brightest minds to get people to click on ads. How can we use the brightest minds to solve this problem, to give people a real, informed consent?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to consider that there are a lot of good opportunities to do with data, but it's also for a data scientist or a programmer, it's very attractive to go to Google or Facebook. I mean, now maybe it's a bit less than a couple of years ago because of all the scandals. But there is a lot of money and a lot of opportunities. I mean, it's a programmer's heaven to go to Google because there are so many innovation and products. So I think maybe we have to switch that incentive, also give that kinds of opportunities in other industries, provide them with the data to do the same kind of research, to develop the same skills that Google can do. And I think that is also something that goes a bit beyond, saying, it's a difficult question. I mean, there are lots of different opportunities, lots of different aspects to that. But
let me just try to think along. We might turn it around. That you, as a user, or what term you use for a user, you state your own preferences. You can use my data for ABC. Me, for example, I really love cookies because I don't get any ads on football, on cars, because I don't like them. I get ads on certain performances and stuff. So for me, it's okay. So might we turn it around? That users just state themselves, this is the kind of data you can use from me. And anytime you click on a website which doesn't concur with your own privacy policy, then it says, you violated your privacy policy on that point, or won't that work? Yeah,
no, completely agree. I mean, there will also be a challenge to not make it super labor intensive, that people are constantly, setting all these preferences. But I completely agree. That's also something that I've tried to address in many of my projects. That it's maybe reversing the system, because now by default the infrastructure says that all the information I Google is Google's, but it should be mine because
it's about you.
It's about me. I'm the product. So let me be in charge. So I couldn't agree more. Yeah,
I'm a product with an opinion. Yes. Dick van Schoneveld, one of the viewers, actually asked about another project of you. Could you explain something more about the non-discrimination by design project? Non-discrimination by design, that sounds cool.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a project I recently worked on with a team of lawyers, actually, about discrimination in algorithms. Very problematic thing. I mean, the Dutch child toeslagenaffaire, zoals we het hier noemen.
Child support.
Child support, that was kind of, one of the big alarms here. I was invited by this team to collaborate with them to make the risks of algorithmic harm in technology more visible. So we worked on, it was commissioned by the Dutch government, by the Dutch Ministry of Interior and Kingdom Relation. So they kind of made this handbook, a guide to build principles and to give examples of how can a system can be less discriminatory. So asking questions, it's an iterative process. It's six different steps, all kinds of things. And they asked me to hey, can you visually make those steps, make the principles more visual and make it more understandable, because it was also quite a big theme.
And that's what artists do. You make visible all these things we have on the internet in society. Final question, where can we buy the book? On Amazon?
Oh, well, funny that you ask, actually. I just produced a new one, and it will be auctioned very soon. So if you want to know more about that, keep track of my website. Or,
yes. And it's also free online as an e-publication. You just have to click on the British News website and download all the user agreements. Then you got also the book.
Don't spoil that.
Okay, yeah, well, the physical book is much better. Thank you very much, Julia Janssen.
Thank you so much.